This is the 2021 Ford F-150 Powerboost. Basically what that means is that this is a hybrid F-150, and in today's video we're going to use it to try to charge an electric car. Now, being a hybrid, this F-150 combines both gasoline and electricity, much like the original Toyota Prius. But unlike the original Toyota Prius, the hybrid system in this truck develops over 400 horsepower and 570 pound-feet of torque. But more interestingly, it means that in this truck we have a ton of onboard power that you can tap into using these outlets in the bed. All right, let me start up the F-150, foot on the brake, push the start button. We're ready to go, but of course, being a hybrid, you don't hear anything. That's because it's running on electricity. Now, it does have this feature called Pro Power Onboard. Those are those outlets in the rear. And if I expand the screen here, you'll see how this works. I have these little indicators that tell me how many watts I am using. And if I turn on a generator mode, now I can actually leave the vehicle, lock the vehicle, and still use those outlets in the rear. Let's test them out. Now, first up, just to make sure the system was working, I decided to plug in my cell phone to make sure we were getting electricity to these rear outlets. We have power going to the outlets, but you can charge a lot more than one cell phone, let me tell you what. The inverter in this truck that turns direct current from the battery into alternating current for these plugs is rated at 7.2 kilowatts. Which may not mean a lot to some of you out there, but let me put this into perspective. 1 kilowatt is equivalent to 1,000 watts. So the rating on this, 7,200 watts. Ford says that is enough power to run 28 average refrigerators all at the same time. There's so much power back here. You have 4 120 volts and 1 240 volt outlets. So let's put this to the test. What I have here is a 4-slot toaster. This is a very power hungry toaster. Actually, most toasters are. Anything with heating elements typically draw a lot of power. Now let's see what happens when I plug this toaster into one of these outlets. Can I turn it on and make some delicious sourdough? Push down here. Oh yeah, there's heat coming out. Let's see what the truck says. Now the Ford will cycle that gasoline engine on and off when the high voltage battery is depleted, but using this one toaster, the engine remained off. All right, with the toaster plugged in, you can see here we are drawing 1,700 watts. We are still running on battery. The engine isn't on. Let's step it up a notch. All right, now for another power hungry appliance, this space heater. Let's go ahead and plug her in and set her to high. Let's see what's going on with our power dials. All right, well, the engine just kicked on, but that's kind of understandable because take a look at this. We have 1,700 watts going to one set of outlets, 1,400 watts going to the other set for a total of 3,100 watts or 3.1 kilowatts. So now we have my phone charging, the toaster running, and the space heater going. And we are still nowhere near this truck's capacity of 7.2 kilowatts. With the phone plugged in, the toaster on high, and the space heater developing as much heat as it could, I decided to plug in a blender, and the results were, well, no problem. Now, perhaps a more realistic test of the F-150's capability would be powering tools. And I could spend the rest of my life testing every tool imaginable, or you could head out to your garage and take a look at the label and do a little bit of math. For example, this sander is rated at 120 volts and 1.9 amps. To find the watts, simply multiply the volts times the amps. Now, to test that 240 volt outlet, we could use something like a welder or an RV, and I think later this week we're going to try both of those things using the new F-150, but I want to try something that is incredibly power hungry, something that draws a big load over a sustained period of time, something like this electric car. Now, battery electric vehicles have enormous batteries relative to consumer goods. They also draw a lot of power, and they draw that power for several hours on end as they try to recharge this battery. Now, this 2014 i3 is pretty much completely dead. And I'm going to try using the F-150 to fill it back up to full, see if it can do it. Charging an electric car with a generator is a subject we have explored in the past. And the reasoning behind it is sound. If you're in an EV and you run it completely out of power, can you use a gasoline generator like this Generac to put just enough electricity back into the battery to get you home or to the nearest charging station? Well, the answer, as it turns out, is yes and no. Mostly no. Here's why. This right here is your typical off-the-shelf generator, and immediately we run into issues when we go and plug in our charge connector. Now, starting it up, it starts up fine. Obviously, this is a standard 3-prong plug. This connector came with the i3, plug it in, and we get a grounding fault. And this is very typical for generators of this size, and it's a big problem because EVs are really picky about how the power source they get is grounded, and these small generators aren't typically grounded correctly. Now, the way to solve this is to buy a big metal rod and pound it into the ground, and then of course, hook it up to the generator. That can solve it. Or you can go out and build this sketchy little thing. This is called a bonding plug. Look it up if you want to know more about it. It's a little bit scary in how it works, but it does allow the generator to be properly grounded to charge an EV. So let's take a look and see if we have the proper grounding, and then we'll plug it in and see how long it will take to charge up this BMW. So we got the i3 charging using the portable generator, but that brings us to our next issue: charging time. With a small generator like this, the car says it will be fully charged in about 15 hours at 2 a.m. and considering it's just past 10 a.m. here right now, that is an incredibly long time. Now luckily, if you want a faster generator, you can buy a faster generator like this. This is a beast, the Honda EU 7000 IS. It's fuel injected, it's got electric start. Oh yeah. This is a beast of a power unit, but unfortunately, there are some other issues with this. First of all, it's incredibly heavy. It weighs well over 200 pounds, and even though it does charge at 240 volts, you still have that grounding issue. And then there's the cost. This generator cost about $5,000. So the generator situation is a little bit of a tricky one. Yes, you can charge an EV using these portable units, but it's not ideal. So let's give the F-150 a try. Now I could use the included charge connector. This is just your typical 3-prong 120 volt outlet plug, but this is going to take a long time to charge. I need to use that 240 volt outlet, and for that I'm going to need to grab my wall box. In order to push the limits of the F-150 and see how fast it'll charge our dead BMW i3, I'm not going to use a standard 3-prong 120 volt plug. I'm going to use this beefy thing, 240 volts of fun. But immediately there's an issue because there is a dedicated 240 volt port on the F-150. It's right here, but clearly that's not going to work. We need to run an adapter, and this yellow adapter converts that twist outlet to a standard 4-prong outlet like you'd find powering your dryer at home. Okay, moment of truth here. We have power going to our wall connector, and this is great. Also looks like no grounding issues either, unlike the portable generators. Now, just so I don't blow something up on the F-150, I'm a little bit worried about this, I'm going to change the charging power. Level 2 is 240 volts on the BMW, so let me go down to reduced, and then we'll jack it up to max if it can take a reduced. Now you can see the current battery charge is right around 4%, and you can also see here, I have no miles of electric range. See that? It's dead. Range, no miles. This is the J1772 charge connector. Oh wait, before I plug it in, I'm gonna go ahead and brim off the F-150 tank so that when we're done charging this, we can see how much gas we used. But let me do that and then we'll come back. After brimming the gas tank at the gas station just down the road from our offices, it was time to start charging. The moment of truth, the F-150 is on, generator mode engaged, plugged it in. Let's take a look at the box and then inside the truck and see what's happening. So you can see here on this screen on our charging box, 239 volts and 15.7 or 16 amps. Let's see what the truck is saying. So coming into the F-150 on 240 volts, I noticed something interesting. We don't have a separate gauge for 240 volts. Rather, we still have the same gauges that we had on the 120 volt test, but interestingly enough, what you have to do is add the two together to find the current output. So you can see 1800 plus 1800 is 3600 watts or 3.6 kilowatts. And I think what it's doing is, if you look in the back of the truck, there's actually 4 different 120 volt outlets. 2 are attached to one gauge, 2 are attached to the other. When you go to 240 volts, I think it basically just combines the two. So we are still well within the 7.2 kilowatt capability. So let's jump up the charging rate there on the i3. So currently on this reduced charging rate, it says we'll be charged at 5:48 p.m. It is currently 11:44 a.m., so about 6 hours. But let me see if I can change that here by charging. Here we go. All right, so immediately by changing the AC power setting to maximum, that jumped down to 3:19 p.m. So that is under 4 hours. Well, that certainly made a difference. Set at maximum, we are now pulling 30 amps, which is, well, right at the max of what the F-150 can deliver, and we know this by looking at the screen. The power dials in the F-150 have a green, an orange, and a red color scheme. As you start drawing more and more power, the dials go from green into the orange as the watts increase, and then eventually they go into this scary red zone. Well, with the i3 plugged in, take a look what happened. Wow, so take a look at this, the Pro Power onboard display here, 3600 watts plus 3600 watts. We are maxed out at 7200 watts or 7.2 kilowatts. You can see here the RPM is sitting right at 1000 RPM, and fuel is of course completely full because I just topped it off from the gas station down the road. Now I'm going to let this sit like this, see how long we can hold at 7200 watts, and then I'm going to come back a little bit later and do a bunch of checkups to see how much fuel we have used. Ford says that you can idle for up to 32 hours, but we'll see what the reality is there. This really is a torture test for this F-150. We're asking a lot of this Pro Power onboard system. I mean, think about it. If you're powering something like an RV, you may hit peaks into the 6 or 7 kilowatt range if you're using a lot of power, but it's not going to be sustained for hours. However, charging this BMW, there is no mercy given. We are maxed out. 7,200 watts, as red as the dial can go, and we're holding it. Time for the 15-minute update. Let's see how the truck is handling max load of 7.2 kilowatts. Now, this makes me a little bit nervous. Ideally, I would dial in something like 25 amps on the i3 like you can do in a Tesla, so you don't max it out at 30, but the i3 has low and high. Low would have taken too long. High is maxing out the Ford. So let's see what's going on the wall box here. You can see here we're still pulling a tick over 30 amps, which is what the truck is rated for, and we have generated just under 2 kilowatt hours. Now the i3 has a 22 kilowatt hour battery. So the i3 says we'll be done charging at 3:18 p.m. So far we have put 8 miles into the battery. Now one cool thing about the Ford in generator mode is you can actually get out and lock the truck so no one walks away with it while it's running. But let's see what we're displaying on the center screen. So like I said, about 15 minutes in, the engine is still holding 1000 RPM, and on the screen, these are fully red, so we are completely maxed out at 7.2 kilowatts. Like I said, not ideal, but I don't see any warnings, I don't see any temperature issues, so I guess we'll just keep on going. Now I had to run out of the office for another project, so I let Andre, our TFLtruck.com editor, take care of monitoring the Ford and the BMW. And an hour and a half later, he had this update.
So we've been charging for 1 hour and 41 minutes, or about 1 hour and 42 minutes now. And the F-150 delivered about 12 kilowatt hours of energy at 30.5 amps. This is maxed out. You could see the temperature it's reporting at 99.7 degrees, which is fairly normal. But I also have my trusty laser thermometer here. I'm going to check the temperature of these connections because we tend to do this when we're charging on level 2, maybe level 3, to see how efficient it is. So if I measure at the yellow plug, that's about 92 degrees right here by the plug. This one is very cool, 64. And this one is also very cool, about 65. So as far as this is concerned, no temperature concerns. Let's check inside the Ford and see exactly what it's reporting. It's still in the same generator mode, and this is a surprise to me. The engine is still at 1000 RPM, and I've never, I was going up to the truck, I never heard it rev up. So it's always just idling, which is really cool. So it's not loud, not very loud. Okay, so what is the BMW saying? Whoa, look at this. It's almost 3/4 full, it says. It's got about 47 miles of range. The estimated time is about the same as before. 3:17 p.m. So after under 2 hours, we picked up 3/4 of the range of this particular car.
At the 2.5-hour mark, Andre noticed that the BMW started charging much more slowly. And this is very common with electric vehicles. As they get more and more full, they start to charge much more slowly.
I just came out to the F-150, the engine is off, so maybe the charging has already finished. It says it's still pulling about 7.5 amps, and total time is 2 hours 43 minutes and 17.23 kilowatt hours, which means the battery is almost full.
When I arrived back at the office, I was pleased to find the charging had just finished. Now, we've had our producer Zach and Andre out here checking on this thing like every 15 minutes, and take a look. It just stopped charging. 3 hours and 25 minutes. We are now pulling 0 amps, and let's see how much power it sucked up. 18.06 kilowatt hours. When we first started this experiment, it said it would be full at about, what, 3:18 p.m. I think it was?
Yes.
It's currently 3:10 p.m. But you can see here, it is displaying a full charge now. Let me start it up, see what the percentage is. 100% battery. The tank still reads full. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
But you can see here, nothing going on with the Pro Power onboard, so I'm gonna go ahead and shut her down. And now, we're gonna fill up the gas tank all the way up to full, just like we did when we started this test, and see how much gas we used. If you're wondering why we generated 18 kilowatt hours from empty to full and not 22 kilowatt hours, which is what BMW claims the battery capacity is, first of all, BMW does include a big buffer in there, so you don't have access to all 22, and second of all, it is a 6-year-old electric car, so it could have lost some capacity. I just topped the F-150 off at the same station just down the road. Any guesses how much fuel it used to charge up our i3? 2.97 gallons, and that's using our 2-click method where we top off the tank, let it sit for 30 seconds, and then top it off again to let any bubbles settle. Almost 3 gallons to charge the i3 from dead to full. Now this is where things get really exciting. We can actually figure out an MPG number using this method to charge up the little BMW. This BMW i3 will typically do about 60 to 70 miles on a full charge in the real world. So let's assume, given the electricity generated by the F-150, we could probably go 65 miles on this charge. With a quick bit of math, we discover that 65 miles divided by 2.97 gallons of fuel used to generate those 65 miles, 21.8 miles per gallon, which is pretty poor. Just goes to show how inefficient this method of charging is, because the F-150, which is a full-size truck driving around under its own power, is rated at 24 mpg combined. Now here's the ultimate question. Is this a realistic test for the real world? In some ways yes, and in some ways no. Let's start out with the no. Please don't charge your electric car with your F-150 regularly. It's a silly thing to do. Just plug it into the wall. It'll be much, much cheaper and much, much more efficient. Keep in mind, it did cost almost $8 to fill up our EV, so this is not a great way to keep your electric car charged. But it does prove that you can sustain a high wattage with the F-150 over a sustained period of time. So in theory, if your house is wired correctly, you could use this truck to plug in the case of an emergency and power some of the things inside your house. Actually, a lot of the things, because 7.2 kilowatts is a ton of power. With the BMW charged, I thought, hey, let's give the Tesla a whirl, and sure enough, it worked great. Once again, no grounding issues. I did still have to use the yellow dongle, and I did use the supplied Tesla connector, but yeah, it worked fine. Now, the Tesla is capable of charging on AC at over 11 kilowatts. Of course, the Ford Max is out at 7.2, so the charging rate would have been similar to that of the BMW, but you're probably wondering, why didn't I just run this test with the Tesla to begin with? This car has around a 70 kilowatt hour battery versus 20 in the BMW, and I just didn't have the amount of time it would take to perform that test. The big advantage of the Tesla is I can manually go in and select the charge current, so I don't have to max it out at 30 amps like I did with the BMW. I could dial it back to 20 or 25 and leave a little bit of a buffer. Now, for those of you wondering why charge an electric car with a gas truck, well, because we can. But in all seriousness, this was a very interesting test, and it just goes to show, if you're wondering, can I power my saw with the F-150? The answer is yes, probably, because if it can charge this monster battery in the Tesla, it'll probably keep your little jigsaw up and running. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, this is Tommy for the Fastlane Car and the Fastlane Truck. For the latest and greatest and honest and independent reviews, check out TFL Car and TFLtruck.com.